Our scripture reading is found in Matthew 2, verse 13. When an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, "Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him."
I don't know how you felt when Maya read that, but that was pretty cute. Thank you, Maya, for reading that, or reciting that scripture. I appreciate that. Well, I'm glad that you're here. Did you have a good week? It's good to be here, worshiping together, remembering the story of Christmas. We're in this sermon series entitled The Christmas Journey. We want to learn how to follow the star. And you know, the more I live and lead and think about life, and especially when I look back in my life, I'm realizing more and more that there's a God who's on my side. The other day, Catherine asked me to cut some sweet potatoes so she could make this special fried sweet potato thing that was really good, and put a batter around it and fry it. It was amazing, but she was cutting it. So I said, "Hey, let me help you out." So I took the knife. I noticed it was one of our duller knives, but I just took the knife that was already there, and I started, cutting sweet potatoes. And you know how it is when you cut sweet potatoes or potatoes that aren't cooked? It's hard, right? You got to kind of stab it, dig into it, and then push hard. And I did that for one potato. Nothing happened. Second potato, everything was normal. Third potato, I think it was the fifth potato when I was pushing through that I said, "Ah!" And Catherine screamed because she got scared that I cut my finger. I had flashbacks a few years prior when I was with my aunt in Colorado, and I was trying to prove to her that I could cut an avocado in my hand. And I remember showing her, "Let me show you how you do it." I cut it, and I went too deep, and I slit my finger. And so I had flashbacks of that time a few years ago when I cut my hand. This is the past week. I'm thinking, "Oh man, look at my finger, look at my finger." I look at my finger, and thankfully, there was no cut. So then what I did was I actually licked it, and I put it on, I went to like a napkin and tested it on a white napkin to see if there was blood. There was no blood. And you know what I did? I don't know if you're a believer in God or what, or maybe you've believed in Him for a long time and you're questioning, I don't know about this God stuff. Well, here's what I do know. I was sharing this week that there are no atheists in foxholes. That when you're in a foxhole, especially two people in a foxhole and there's war, you better believe that those people don't believe in God or are praying to God or a divine power. At that moment, when I saw that my hand was protected and saved, I really thank God. I said, "God, thank you for protecting my hand." Friend, I don't know where you're at. If you're here in this sanctuary, those watching online, we're welcome. We're glad that you came. But what I want you to know is this: that if you look back in the history of your life, especially the pain points of your life, if you're open, you'll realize that there's been a divine power, a God that has protected you. In fact, the Christmas story, yes, is about a God who gives Himself or comes as a child to give Himself for humanity. The Christmas story is also about God's protection and how He protects us. And we're going to learn about God's protection in today's story in Matthew chapter 2. If you have a Bible, you're welcome to turn there. If you don't, it's in the bulletin. If you don't have a physical Bible, go to the Bible app or go to Google and go to BibleGateway.com. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to read a familiar story and review a familiar story and to see how God shields our calling, how He protects us. And that's what we're going to learn about today in today's teaching. Today's teaching is entitled, "When God Shields Your Calling." The Christmas story reminds us that God is in the business of protecting us. But before we jump into Matthew chapter 2, we have to go back to chapter 1 to answer the question, what is God up to? What's God's main purpose? So Matthew chapter 1, we'll start there. to kind of give a little introduction and then get into the main passage for today. So Matthew chapter 1, now notice here, and we discussed this 2 weeks ago. Matthew chapter 1, verse 18. Look at how God is setting up his story and setting up his purpose. Now, mind you, the writer of this gospel, this first book of the New Testament, is Matthew. Okay? And how do we know that? Because it's called the Gospel of Matthew. He wrote this gospel. He's writing to people, especially to Jewish people 2,000 years ago, to show and to prove that this Christ child, this Jesus who came, was the promised one that the Old Testament talked about. And so now, after he recites and shows the genealogy of Jesus, he then dives in, changes the chapter, and he starts a new chapter, chapter 1, verse 18. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother, Mary, was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Spirit. Verse 19. Okay, through the Spirit. Verse 19, because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly, right? But here, look at these two verses, 20 and 21. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid. So an angel shows up to Joseph when? In a dream. An angel shows up to Joseph in a dream. And you're going to see the same thing happen in our main passage today, but I'm just reading this passage to you to set this story up. Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. Verse 21, she will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will what? He will save his people from their sins. What's going on here? What is the text teaching us? What is this story, this amazing story teaching us? God is a God who loves us. He's a God of love. And his plan, his primary plan, is to rescue the world and reconnect people to God through Jesus Christ. Really, this is God's love story. This is God's love story. When was the last rom-com that you saw? All right? There are a lot of Christmas love stories on Netflix right now. But none of those stories matches the love story of God. None of those stories matches the love story of God. How do I know? What is the love story of God anyway? You see, back in the beginning of this amazing storybook in Genesis chapter 1, God creates this beautiful world. And then he shares in Genesis 1, you don't have to turn to it, I'm just going to read it for you. He says in verse 26 of the first chapter of this book called the Bible, this storybook. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. And then 27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So what's going on here? God creates, the crowning act of his creation was you and me. And he creates us. And what does it mean for us to be made in God's image? Well, to be made in God's image, yes, we're creative and we work hard we're innovative creatures as human beings. But one of the greatest qualities of this God is that he is a God of love. And he created mankind to enjoy a love relationship with him. But then what happens in this love story? Well, in Genesis chapter 3, this enemy called the serpent comes, he slithers through a tree, and he comes to Eve, tricks Eve to eat this fruit that she wasn't supposed to eat. Then she tricked Adam. They both ate the fruit, and then they plunged the human race into this life and this feature of selfishness and evil and sin and all of this. And then in the same chapter, I'm not going to read all the verses for you, but in Genesis chapter 3, God basically comes to the serpent and says, I'm going to judge you, and one day I'm going to send a hero or a knight in shining armor. You know what a knight in shining armor is? Is that rescue, that victor, right? The conqueror who rescues that damsel or that princess. One day I'm going to send my knight in shining armor to come and to rescue. This is God's love story. This is his plan. This is his love story. And then a few hundred years later, about 700 years before Matthew writes, hey, Jesus is here, the prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Now, this is pretty cool. The prophet Isaiah says this, right, 700 years before Christ came. All right, I was born 1982, and it would be like someone saying, hey, Nestor is going to be born, someone in 1282 writing, hey, Nestor is going to be born in a specific location in 1982. Check this out. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel. 700 years. God is giving us a clue through the Old Testament that one day this knight in shining armor is going to come riding as a victor to rescue us. And guess what? The entire Old Testament of this amazing storybook is a promise from God saying, hey, people, I'm going to give you a knight in shining armor. The knight in shining armor is coming. And do you know what the New Testament is? The New Testament is a fulfillment of that promise. And Matthew writes, the Old Testament, all of the old prophets and all the writers in the Old Testament said, the knight in shining armor is coming to rescue us. And Matthew is the first gospel writer who writes these words, and he says that the knight in shining armor is here. He's here. So what is God's main purpose? Long answer. God's purpose is to show how much he loves us by offering freedom from selfishness and brokenness, and also restoring a relationship with him through Jesus. That's a lot. I just packed a bunch of words into that long sentence. What's the short answer? What is God's primary purpose? Well, the entire Bible and the story of God and Jesus can be summarized in 3 words. Kenrick reminded me. Kenrick, our worship leader, thank you for leading us today. He reminded me of this quote that we read a few months ago. In 3 words, what is God's primary purpose? God saves sinners. God saves sinners. In other words, God rescues the lost. That's what God is up to. But hey, you're thinking, okay, how does this apply to me? Good question. If God's main purpose is to rescue lost people like you and me, then what is our primary calling and our purpose? Our main purpose is to be reunited with God. That's the reason for our existence. It's to be with God. It's to reunite, to be reunited with God. I am called to reconnect with God in my life and to give this amazing God a chance. I remember the first time I did that at age 19, right, over 20 years ago, where I had grown up in a church tradition and in a church school tradition, learning about this amazing God. But it was in the summer of 2002 that I actually gave God an open door into my heart. I said, God, you're pretty amazing from what I hear. I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to let you in. And friends, that was the best decision I ever made in my life. I am called to reconnect with God and Jesus every single day as well. And Jesus does this when he comes into my life and I enjoy a real delightful relationship with God, a conversation with him every morning and throughout the day, and especially when I have like pain points and tough times in my life. That this amazing God that I allow into my heart, this Christ child Jesus who came, I allow into my heart, he frees me from the handcuffs of my selfishness and my brokenness. He does this. He literally does this. And I experience God's amazing love in my heart, and I can't help but love him in return. It's not even a command for me. You know, God says, hey, love me. But of course I'm going to love you because you love me so much. And you know what? So awesome, but also challenging about this God? This God who I allow into my life, he says, hey, Nestor, I love you. But he also calls me out. And I don't know if you've experienced this lately, when God has called you out for something. But for some reason, he likes to do that. And this God challenges me, and he says, hey, Nestor, Look, you're living with my love in your heart, but my love cannot thrive in your heart with your selfishness and brokenness on display. Hey, Nestor, with your permission, let me fix that. Let me fix that. Okay, God, I'll let you come in and I'll let you fix that. Let me explain. Are you guys familiar with the Myers-Briggs assessment? Myers-Briggs. It's a personality assessment. And, I was having a conversation with someone this week, and I remembered that I took a thorough assessment of my personality profile in 2020. So I was reviewing my personality profile. And if you're not familiar with the acronyms, you can look it up. But you should take it, by the way. It's really helpful to understand your personality profile. So mine is ENTJ. Okay, do we have any other ENTJs in the house, if you're familiar with this? Okay, so what is that? Well, I was looking up online, like who are some examples of an ENTJ? And they were saying, one person in particular, Steve Jobs. I was like, oh, cool, Steve Jobs. That's cool. He was pretty innovative. But I had also read part of his biography, and I noticed that he wasn't really the kindest person. ENTJs, okay, they're strong. Their biggest strength, their greatest strength, is their leadership. In fact, ENTJs are born leaders, adept at steering teams towards success. Here are our goals. Here's where we're going. Let's move, right? So that's my personality, and I can attest, I am wired that way, okay? And I just love thinking strategy and where the church is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. That's cool. But for every strength, there's also a shadow. And here's my shadow. Here's my struggle. And they hit it on the head. ENTJs are impatient. They are very impatient. ENTJs may become frustrated when things don't move as quickly as they'd like or when others don't keep up with their pace. And friends, that's a true struggle for me. And I was wrestling with my own patience this week in my own parenting. I'm thinking to myself this week, why aren't my kids listening to me? And I remember one instance in particular just the other day when I was at Mod Pizza. You guys been to Mod Pizza? Okay? I know what's best on a pizza, okay? You have to put veggies on the pizza. You can't just have cheese. Right? But then there's this conversation. No, I don't want tomatoes on there. No, we have to have tomatoes. No, I don't want tomatoes. And I realized to myself, what is wrong with me that I'm getting so fussy about having tomatoes on a pizza? What's going on here? God spoke to me. He said, Nestor, stop worrying about tomatoes. Stop worrying about tomatoes. I get it. So then the next morning, I get on my knees, which I like to do, and most days, some days I kneel, some days I sit at the table. And one of the best, most fulfilling time of my day are the mornings when I'm able to wake up early and meet God in my kitchen and sit with Him. It's so cool, like I imagine it. All right, God, it's great to have you here at the table. And so I open my Bible and I journal and I pray to Him. It's an amazing experience. And one morning I was thinking this week through John chapter 15, verse 5. And I was reciting this over and over again in my time of prayer and meditation. So literally kneeling on my living room couch, on this brown leather couch, on our soft white rug, praying and reciting John 15, verse 5. I am the vine. This is Jesus speaking. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, or who is connected to me, and I in him, will bear much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. Then my mind wandered and prayed to Him more. Then I came back to that verse, right? John 15:5. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. Well, I said, God, what is that fruit? If I'm connected to you, if you are truly the power source, right? Just like these lights are plugged into a power source. If you're the power source, you promise that fruit's going to come out of me. What kind of fruit are you talking about? Well, then I thought about Galatians 5, where Paul wrote, well, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But it was that, I think the fourth one, love, joy, peace, patience. Yeah, God, I don't really have that right now. And you know what God told me? He said, Nestor, the reason why you are impatient is because you think that you're the true leader. You think that you're the one in control. You think that you are the true leader. Listen up, Nestor. You're not the true leader. I'm the true leader. And if you want to bear fruit, don't try to take things into your own hands. Don't worry about control. Worry about connecting to me, and I'll take care of the rest. Don't worry about control. Worry about connecting. Connecting. The problem with me is I think that I'm the one in control, and I am learning to surrender, and it's a long process because the word patience is also translated long suffering. I am learning to surrender and trust the one who really is in control. I am tired of worrying about tomatoes on pizza. I need to surrender to the one who is in control. You see, our main purpose is to be reunited with God, and when we are connected to Him, Jesus rescues us from our selfishness and our brokenness. God is doing everything that He can to save and connect with us, but there are forces that threaten our purpose, and this is exactly what happens in the passage that Maya just read. The first one, Matthew chapter 1, Matthew chapter 2. Look at the stories, though, starting with verse 16. The story goes like this. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 16, when Herod, there was a king in the land, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi. Now, Pastor Rodney preached a really amazing sermon, great teaching last week. If you didn't have a chance to listen to it, listen to it. About these three non-Jewish, these Gentile, pagan Magi that come and worship Jesus. When they leave the scene, Herod is not happy because he's supposed to be the king of the land, but then he hears about this other king. Verse 16, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Verse 17, then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. And it was, if you don't know the story of Jeremiah, the Old Testament prophet, Jeremiah, he even wrote a book called Lamentations where he was lamenting for his people. And in the book of Jeremiah, he's quoting this. The verse says, it says in verse 18, a voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. The soldiers come and they find all the kids, the young boys, 2 years old and younger. This is infanticide. They're literally killing babies. Why is Herod doing this? What's up with Herod? What is going on with Herod? Let me ask you a question. Does Herod sound like a man of integrity, yes or no? Do you think that Herod was a secure person in his identity, or do you think that he was insecure? It sounds like there was some insecurity with King Herod. King Herod, what is he doing? According to this story, King Herod is threatening God's purpose. He's literally trying to kill the Christ child. Herod is threatening God's purpose, and friends, I believe that there are forces that are threatening our purpose today. Friends, you don't have to look very far if you look at your own life. I believe that there are forces that are threatening your purpose today. Here are at least 3 sources of those threats. Threat number 1, there is a supernatural enemy. Can you say the word enemy with me? Enemy. I know those of us who live in this modern world, we now live in a scientific world, and the popular and the most prevalent view in today's society, especially here in America, is that we are now living in a scientific world. We are logical, and we ain't got time for fantasy and supernatural magical stories. Now, we have time to watch cool Disney stories and to learn these fictional stories, and just like Lion King and Frozen and all those movies, the Bible is no different from that. It's just this amazing fictional supernatural book. Well, let me tell you something. What's so amazing about this amazing storybook is that it's pinpoint accurate about the real life struggles that we have. That there's this inherent evil nature within us. But it also teaches us that there is a primary hero in the book, and guess what his name is? Jesus. But there is also an anti-hero or a villain. Guess who that villain is? It's the enemy, or they know him as the serpent that showed up in Genesis. It's Satan, right? So, according to this story, there is a supernatural being behind. If you pull back the curtain, there's a supernatural being in humanity, in our reality, that is trying to usurp and to take our attention away and destroy the purposes of this amazing God and this story of Jesus. So threat number one, this supernatural enemy called Satan. Threat number two, to our purpose and your purpose, there is a human adversary. For Jesus, for Joseph and Mary, it was Herod. There are modern day Herods, friends. There are modern day Herods that try to derail God's purpose for your life. My advice, don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. I was having a conversation with someone this week, speaking about the power of mentors and surrounding ourselves with people who are ahead of us, who are friends, coaches, counselors, therapists, people ahead of us in life. And I was sharing with him how for me, it's very important that I surround myself with people who have both a growth mindset and a God mindset. What do I mean by that? There are a lot of people in today's society that have a growth mindset who are really killing it, who are really making a dent on YouTube and who are social influencers, right? And so we see all this, but I'm not so concerned about just having a growth mindset. I also want people who have a God mindset, people who have character. And I was talking to this individual asking, hey, who are people in your life that are mentors that you allow into your life? And I told this individual this week, my advice to you, be very intentional and careful about the mentors the advisors that you allow in your life. You see, because the quality of your advisors will determine the quality of your aspirations. The quality of your mentors will determine the quality of your life. And I believe that if we allow Herods into our life, that they will derail God's purpose for us. There are some modern day Herods that try to derail you from your purpose. But I want to speak to some of you here, those of you who know you have been living with integrity in school, at work, in your families. You refuse to continue to live in the swamp of other people's opinions. You continue to refuse to swim in the swamp of selfishness and evil and wickedness all around you. There are people in here, in this space, and those watching online who have made up their minds, I am going to choose to be a person of integrity. I'm not going to listen to the Herods. Rather, I'm going to listen to the goodness of God. And friend, I want to affirm you today. No one else sees it, but you know in the deepest recesses of your heart, you know that you've been doing the right thing. And I want to tell you between me and you, which is a secret between me and you, that I am proud of you and that God is proud of you. Don't continue to listen to the Herods out there. Listen to the Messiah. Threat number one, the supernatural enemy. Threat number two, a human adversary. Threat number three, and we all know this threat. Here's the greatest threat to your purpose and to my purpose with God. It's myself. Ourselves. Our own insecurities. You see, Herod was an insecure leader, and because he was insecure, he did some crazy things. He was killing babies. Herod was insecure. He was a people pleaser. Herod didn't really have any authority with the Jews. Herod was appointed by the Roman Empire, so he was really a fake leader for the Jewish people. He was a leader on paper, but people didn't really trust him. Herod was culturally and religiously isolated. He was a Roman, and he did not understand the religious culture of the Jewish people. The Jews, you think that they trusted Herod? No way, Jose. They didn't trust him. In fact, their view of the Romans, they're just trying to tax us, to take our money. The Jewish people did not trust him. And Herod was constantly watching his back. He was worried that so-called messiahs would come and would usurp his rule and take his throne. Herod is insecure because his power and his authority depends on external validation. That means that he was insecure because he was so worried about what people thought about him. We often feel insecure because we tie our worth to others' opinions. On Wednesday nights, my friend Raven and I lead a small group called the Thrive Book Club. It's amazing. We just meet there in the center of Yorktown Mall. And the other night, 2 Wednesdays ago, and you're welcome to come if you want, we're learning how, we're really coaching each other to learn how we can thrive in life and faith. We had some new people last week. It was great. Here was one, let me read to you a line here from this book called The Dynamic Drive by Molly Fletcher. And we discussed this for quite some time. She says, sports psychologist Dr. Michael Gervais calls our fear of people's opinions the single greatest constrictor of human potential. Let me read that again. Sports psychologist Dr. Michael Gervais calls our fear of people's opinions the single greatest constrictor of human potential. What does that mean? This means that as human beings, we live our lives by the opinions of others. We allow the opinions of others to tell us how we should live, and so we're always walking on eggshells. We fear what other people think about us. We are, and I'm guilty of this, we are people pleasers more than we realize. And friends, I have to be honest between me and God when I'm praying with Him. And friends, you know what's amazing about God? Is more than just this amazing book. When I allow Him into my life, He loves me so much that He calls me out and He challenges me. And He challenges me to grow in Him and to grow in love. What I'm realizing about myself is that I place too much value on what other people think about me. And what I'm learning to do, friends, is I'm learning to let go of other people's judgments and overcome my limiting beliefs. Let me give you an example of this. I believe with all of my heart that 2025 is going to be a make or break year for this beautiful community. I believe it. The hardest work that we're going to have to do as a body of believers is to define and clarify our purpose. Sounds easy, it's going to be difficult, but I know that we have amazing growth, gospel-minded people here, and I'm looking forward to where God is going to take us. I truly look forward. I have the privilege of working with our visioning team, this team that's assigned to think through this document that we're forming, which we'll launch sometime next year, early next year. And we had a visioning team meeting on Zoom 2 Sundays ago, or last Sunday, and I remember in that meeting, they say that a sign of a good team is that you can have healthy debate over ideas. And there was healthy debate over ideas. Well, there were several people in that group who challenged some of my perspectives. Okay, they said, hey, I know you're doing this, you're saying this, but we need to do this. And it was challenging. I initially felt defensive because I was holding, and why was I getting so defensive and worked up? I noticed that in my body, that I was getting defensive. I felt defensive because I was holding on to my own limiting belief of needing to be right. But when I caught that, instead of reacting, I let go of my need to defend myself, and instead I honored their ideas, which then released the pressure of other people's judgments. Friends, how can we overcome our people-pleasing and worrying about what people think about us? We can overcome our people-pleasing by learning to honor others. We can overcome our people-pleasing by learning to honor others. And I just want to humble brag on our visioning team. Pastor Rodney, Jason, Stacy, Elmer, Ranjo, Uncle Mutt, Eric, Don, Joel Jr., Kenrick, Shane. It is an honor to work alongside these committed, amazing leaders. And here, I was running this by our pastoral support team, running these values by that we want to live by as a team. We want to live with joy, with full respect for each other. We want to be fully responsible. We want to be compassionate and people of integrity. These are the values that we want to live by. And I want to tell you, church, you have leaders on the visioning team that live out these values. and it's an honor for me to serve alongside you. It truly is. You know, there are forces that threaten our purpose, but we can overcome these threats when we trust our knight in shining armor. Last 2 verses of the story, few more verses, and then we're done. Notice this, friends. We will always face threats from without and also from within. But it is when we trust our knight in shining armor that we can have the confidence to overcome. And notice what happens here in Matthew chapter 2, starting with verse 13. When they had gone, speaking about the Magi who left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. For some reason, God loves to show up in dreams. And the story continues. Get up, he said. Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. To where? To Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. And then look at verse 14. So he got up. Joseph got up. And friends, it's a good thing when God speaks to you in a dream or anytime he speaks to you, it's a good thing to listen right away and to respond right away. Joseph gets up. He took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt. Look at verse 15. Don't miss this verse. Where he stayed until the death of Herod, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. Out of Egypt I called my son. Why Egypt? Why would Matthew quote this prophet in Hosea who talked about Egypt? Why Egypt? Well, here's why. Matthew was writing for mostly the Jewish people, trying to show them that knight in shining armor in the Old Testament, he's literally here. And here's what Matthew is trying to teach us today. That Jesus is protected, and he was trying to teach Joseph, Jesus is protected and he will be in a safe place. God says, hey, I want you to go to Egypt. Egypt was a natural place for Jewish people to seek refuge when they were in danger, especially political danger. So God was literally trying to protect Jesus. All right? What else do we learn about Jesus with this connection to Egypt? Do you remember the first time that Egypt shows up, or at least the main popular story that Egypt shows up in the Old Testament? Who's the main character that rescued people from Egypt? It was Moses. What Matthew was doing in his gospel, he's telling the Jews, and he's telling us today, that Jesus is the new Moses. That he's the new Moses. And like Moses in Egypt, who was rescued from infanticide, right? From babies dying, right? Like Moses in Egypt, who was rescued from infanticide, in the same way, Jesus is rescued from infanticide. Okay? All right, Matthew. You're using Egypt to teach us a lesson about the Messiah. What else is Matthew trying to teach us about the Messiah by using this term Egypt? He's also trying to teach the Jews and for us today that Jesus is the new Israel. What does that mean? Well, you can't help but think about Exodus chapter 4, verses 22 and 23. Then say to Pharaoh, God speaking to Moses, to Pharaoh, the enemy, this is what the Lord says, Israel, my people, is my firstborn. That was really another name for Jacob, but it represents God's people. And then he says in verse 23, and I told you, let my son go so he may worship me, but you refused to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son. What's Matthew doing here? He's trying to tell people that Jesus is the new Israel. And then in Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, I'll just read this for you. There's an explicit connection to Exodus. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. What Matthew's trying to tell us today, this Christ child that we celebrate at Christmas time, this is none other than the new Moses. This is none other than the new Israel. And guess what? This Christ child is not for the Jewish people alone. He is also for the non-Israelites. So if you've come here as a disbeliever, maybe you don't believe in God, or you're kind of on the fence, you've been in church for your whole life, you are in the tradition of knowing God, but you're on the fence about, should I worship the truth of this true God? Jesus is not only for the believers. Jesus is for the non-believers. How do I know that? Do you know who were the first people to worship Jesus, the Messiah? non-believing pagan magi. 3 wise men, and they were wise, even though they were not believers. And so I want to speak to the believers here. Sometimes we say shame on you for not believing in God, but could it be that there are people who don't believe in God who actually believe in God more than you do and more than I do? The first people to worship Jesus were the Magi from the East. And you know what's so cool? Jesus, where does he spend the beginning of his childhood? He spends most of the beginning of his childhood not in Bethlehem amongst his people. He travels way back, way down south to be protected in this country of Egypt. What's the point? God is doing everything that he can to protect his purpose of rescuing the world through Jesus. And friend, I have some news for you. If God protected Jesus' purpose, he will protect your purpose too. If God protected Jesus' purpose, he will protect yours too. The question I have for you, friend, as we wrap up here, is, are you aligned with God's purpose? Are we aligned with God's purpose? Are we aligned with God's purpose? I shared this before, but I want to share this again. I felt impressed to do this again from the same book. We were talking about the alignment audit. Okay? What is that? Friend, for me, I don't know about you, I'm done playing church. I'm just done going through the motions. Like, I'm here because I really believe that there's a living God who's living in me, and he causes me to come alive every day. And this God gets real with me, and he challenges me. And this book, Molly Fletcher in Dynamic Drive, she talks about this thing called an alignment audit, where you write down what's most important in your life. You consider all the categories of your life. Write down on a scale of 10, how important is that to you? And then on the second column, rank how much time and attention and energy have you invested in that. So in the example that I shared a few weeks ago, this person, Dave, he wrote, hey, health. She writes that he's 30 pounds overweight. How important is that to you, Dave? He said 10. How much time, attention, and energy have you invested in that? 5. So there was a discrepancy. Here's the second one, though, and this is what I want to ask us here today. Notice, he said, what's important to me is faith. She wrote, he is skipping church, only going on holidays now, feeling spiritually disconnected. And he wrote down, okay, spirituality and faith, that's a big whopping 10. But then, how much time, attention, and energy have you invested in each? He wrote down 4. There was a misalignment in his life. It's really important to me, 10, but my faith, I'm actually investing a 4. Friend, I want to ask you, you don't have to stand up and take the mic and share your story. Where do you rank, those of you watching online, where do you rank? How important is faith in God and your relationship with God to you? Okay? Just think about that number. Okay? I know that there are 8s, 9s, and 10s here. Then here's the second question. How much time, energy, and resources are you investing in that goal? That's where it gets tricky. Let me tell you something. Have you ever asked this question? How important was it for Jesus, the Son of God? How important was his relationship with the Father? Give me a number on a scale of 1 to 10. What do you think? 10? What else? Give me some other numbers. Breaking the scale. Let's say 15. For Jesus, it was a 15. Okay? How much time, energy did he invest in his relationship with the Father? If we're saying he was at a 15 on the scale of 1 to 10. What do you think? Throw a number out there. Would you say 15? Would you say that he was aligned? Importance and investment, were they the same? Here's how I know he was at a 15 investment. when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he had a choice. Should I go through with dying or not? You see, God protected him when he was a child, when he was first born. He protected him from death because he wanted him to mature, and at age around 33 years old, he knew that his plan was actually to die. Jesus didn't want, his body literally said, I don't want to go through this. But then he prayed in Luke 22, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And guess what Jesus did? His relationship with God was so tight that he suffered on a cruel cross. He would do anything, not only come as a baby, but die as a man. He would do anything for you. That's how much he values you and he appreciates you and how special he thinks you are. This is what fueled God. His fuel, his gasoline was you. This is why the Christ child came. And if this Jesus who loves me so much was so aligned in his inspiration or in his spiritual walk, and he lived out that spiritual walk, he actually was aligned, why wouldn't I want to also say, God, to be honest with you, I think for me it's a 10, but I'm at a 4. You know what, Lord? I'm going to open up my heart, especially this season, and I'm going to ask you to raise it up to a 7 or 8. Could you help me, God? I promise you. You let that God in, he will take you to heights that you've never experienced before. This is an amazing God. Friends, our praise team is going to sing a song. They're going to sing about a song, who is holy forever, who loves us forever. But there's someone here today, you know that you have been misaligned. I know where I'm misaligned. And I want to give you the chance in your heart of hearts, in your heart, in the silence of your own mind, to receive that Messiah into your heart. The child who came into Mary's womb is the same Christ child who wants to come into your heart. And if there's someone who needs that, I want to encourage you to pray that prayer right now in the silence of your own mind. And if you want to come alongside us to learn how to walk with Jesus, would you let us know as a pastoral team? Write down beginning a relationship with Jesus. Maybe you're thinking about baptism. Maybe you're thinking about joining a Bible study group. Look, we meet on Wednesday nights to help people thrive in life and faith. Join us on Wednesday nights. We want to come alongside you in your journey so that you can thrive with Jesus. Make that commitment today. We even have it online on the QR code. Scan that, and then drop your Connect card off in the offering plates on your way out with your tithes and offerings. We'd love to hear from you. Could we stand together and sing praises to this God who gave it all for us? Thank you, Jesus. Let's sing to this Jesus.